So when working with hard surfaces, there are a couple of brushes that are quite handy to use, and I thought we'd talk about the trim adaptive and trim dynamic brushes. So that's BTD for trim dynamic and BTA for trim adaptive. So we'll talk about the trim adaptive first, and we just try and clean up this surface here, and you'll see that if we go to the picker menu here, we can see that it's sampling the mouse down orientation once for the trim adaptive, and then it's going to trim everything to that plane. So basically, if I choose a plane down here, and you can see this is quite flat down here and then kind of slopes up, but if I want it to be at this level, I want everything to be at this height, I can click on this and it will trim to that height. It will respect the edges that it finds if we don't go too far over them, and it will trim everything down to that plane. So you can see now that it's just flattened everything out nicely, and I'll just undo that to see what it was before. It flattened it out to that plane, pretty much like that. So this works on, now obviously if this is slightly convex, this surface here, so if I choose the higher plane on this and I try and trim adaptive, it's going to trim down again to that higher plane, but at the angle that it was. So we're going to get this angle here. So if I don't want that angle because it's not quite flat here, but I do want this angle, I'll choose here, and then I'll flatten everything up to that point. So flatten, flatten, and you can see there that because that angle was slightly off, we have not, I had undone that. I'm going to choose the lower angle and flatten that out again, and so now we have two surfaces that are quite flat. To get to this angle here is a little bit more awkward, simply because there's another surface coming into it like this. So even if we do try and trim here, you're going to see that we're going to be destroying this other surface in the process, and it's not quite as intuitive as you'd like. We can try hold down Alt to push up or down, but to push up instead of down, but that's still not going to make it any easier. So but surfaces like this where you have a plane that you know and you don't really care what's underneath here, I can take this, trim it down to that, if that's the angle that I'm looking for, or here slightly less. You can see because initially I chose an angle that was at a curve, it's going to take everything from that curve down, whereas if I choose this slightly flatter area over here, it's not going to trim as much, it's just going to flatten that out. So this is handy for getting those surfaces, but more difficult for these. However, if we undo everything and we go to our trim dynamic brush, BTD, you'll see that the picker up here has a continuous orientation check for that trim dynamic brush, so it's going to continuously try and sample the normal of the surface underneath and then try and trim to that. So even though we choose a small surface down here, or a surface on the relatively flat area, and we trim across, it will start trimming not an awful lot, but it will actually do a job for us. But you'll see that the longer I scrub, the more it continues to go down and down and down, and when it finds an edge like this, it finds a new plane and says, okay, you want to trim against this plane. If I go down, now you want to trim against this plane. So I haven't lifted my mouse here, and the more I do this, the more it will just continue to find planes and trim them away for me. So a lot more destructive, but more useful when you're doing stuff like trying to put a bevel on an existing plane, and you want to trim to that plane. Basically, you want to create a new plane to trim to. That's the time to use the trim dynamic. So that'll give you those bevels. If you hold down Alt with this, you'll actually bring stuff up to the existing plane. The thing about the trim dynamic is that it doesn't respect edges. So a H polish brush, BHP, will actually try and polish, and when it finds an edge, it will try and keep that edge. So you see it's always trying to keep that edge. It's actually sharpening up that edge, the H polish. If you hold down Alt, you can bring a surface up to that edge. If you don't hold down Alt, it will tighten it down. So we can start sharpening up our edges like this with a H polish brush, and if we get destroyed areas down here, we can hold down Alt and we can bring the edge up, and that will help sharpen that up. So between all of these brushes, BTA for trim adaptive, if you find a surface that's close to being the value that you'd like, simply make a large brush and find that angle. If you want this to be the angle, it will take away an awful lot more. Hope these tips help, and as ever, please do click subscribe, and if you have any suggestions for future tutorials, please do let me know. Cheers, thanks, bye.